What I find very disturbing in all this is that there is an implicit assumption, although it's not always mentioned, that the kind of development that is taking place is going to lead to the sacrifice of some people. So there is a very dangerous kind of an assumption, and we see it actually happening on the ground, that many people will have to suffer, many people will have to be forced into homelessness, landlessness, some will have to die, because we are following a particular economic model. And we will get to those people when we will get to them. So I think the old concepts of trickle-down theory, the old concepts of growth for the sake of growth, are all very much alive. And this is very disturbing because we have evidence from around the world, whether you look at Latin America or Africa or Asia, that these policies have not worked.
How is it possible to explain the paradox of poverty? How is it that in countries in which there is growing wealth, there are actually more poor people than there were before? In short, how is it that we can explain why trickle-down economics does not work? Why doesn't wealth trickle down from the rich to the poor? There are a fixed amount of natural resources in the world, and those who own the resources, land, air, water, and so on, are able to charge higher and higher prices for them as an economy develops. In order to understand that, I think it would be useful to consider a fictitious example of what would happen if we lived in a society in which there was only one oasis that had all the water, which everyone had to come for their water supply. If a single person owned that water supply, that oasis, we would all be forced to pay as much money as we were able to for that water. Now, further imagine that if you lived in that society and you were having to pay huge amounts for some resource that could in fact be owned by all because it came from nature, and there's no particular reason for one person to own it. After a while, or perhaps even in short order, you would begin to feel intense resentment, and you would begin discussing among your fellows, what should we do about this? And you can imagine that there would in fact be an eruption of violence as people began to try to overthrow the people who owned that resource and take it.
You take away their resources so you can have it, so what do they get left? And as time goes on and that resource no longer is so valuable, gold, nobody really cares that much about gold these days, which is what the conquistadores were after. But today those same countries, a lot of them have oil. And so we took away all their gold, we destroyed their cultures, and now we're saying, and now oil's the big one, and we're going to take that too, or gas, or whatever, or water, whatever. And yeah, you perpetuate this terrible system of poverty and this system of desperation and anger.
Terrorism is directly linked to our policies with resources. In a number of these countries, the governments are authoritarian, are dictators, and they're supported by the West because we think that this is the way to protect our access to the resources. And for the population, they've associated dictator and the West.
It's very interesting that if you look at the societies with the least equal distribution of income, they tend to be the most violent. There's a very small correlation between absolute poverty and crime. There's a strong correlation between unequal income distribution and crime. So you look at the poorest societies, they're not at all the ones that are the most violent. It's the ones that have the biggest discrepancy in incomes that are the most violent.
Poverty in the world cannot possibly be eliminated unless the poor themselves say, we insist on justice, not charity. One example of that justice is forgiving international debt. A second element would be to change the tax system in every country of the world. Right now, most taxes fall on the poor in the form of consumption taxes and taxes on wages. If justice is to be done, most of the taxes should fall on property ownership and not on wages, not on people. Third, the poor should demand agrarian reform, land reform, restoring land to the people who actually work on it instead of a few landowners. A fourth thing is to end privatization of natural resources. We've seen in Bolivia what's possible, where the Bolivian people actually took back the water that had been given to Bechtel, and they forced Bechtel out of the country, and now the Bolivian people once more own that water.
no solo lo que se narra como cuento histórico y como mirada de futuro para los países del sur es una ficción, sino que esta narrativa impide el reconocer que la apropiación de recursos por parte de quienes en el planeta utilizamos los recursos más allá de lo que nos corresponde, hace imposible que las condiciones de vida de la mayoría puedan siquiera llegar a un nivel de dignidad.
As long as you can dump it, as long as you can kill Iraqis rather than increase the price of gas, and as long as you only get Bangladeshis or poor people in New Orleans to pay the price instead of you having to drive less and take the metro or the bus or walk, our society is geared toward that choice. And the poor people and the helpless people and the unlucky to be in the places that will be in the front line will pay that price first. Famines are effective market solutions. They reduce demand. So if we leave it to the markets, that's what we have. If there's not enough food, then some people will die, and that reduces demand and the market is balanced. It's an effective market solution. So if we want to avoid such radical solutions, we need to find ways to redistribute and share what we have and get those that use a lot more start using less so that there's still enough for everybody.
The resources of nature are given to all of us, and yet a handful of people and corporations have control of them, oil companies being a prime example that everyone is familiar with. If we could enable everyone to benefit from those resources, we could end poverty. And the way to do that is by restoring the idea of the commons. It means that the value that is currently gotten from those resources, that is currently being privatized in the hands of the corporate shareholders of oil companies or mining companies or real estate syndicates and so on, instead of it being privatized, it would be made available, be shared by all. That's basically what the commons means.
Le système économique que nous avons choisi a été et est toujours financé par les pauvres. Ils le firent d'abord en abandonnant leurs terres ainsi que leurs accès aux ressources naturelles. Ils financèrent son expansion en remboursant les dettes de leur pays, en payant des impôts injustes sur leur travail et leur consommation, ainsi qu'en subissant les conséquences d'échanges internationaux défavorables. Aujourd'hui, en forçant les pauvres à surpayer l'énergie, la nourriture et les autres biens de première nécessité, le Nord augmente le niveau de pauvreté et accroît les inégalités.
Il s'agit de sortir de la croissance comme du sous-développement, c'est-à-dire, bien évidemment, notre décroissance, au sens où notre réduction de la pression de notre mode de vie sur les écosystèmes est la condition pour que eux puissent avoir un poids plus élevé. Vous pensez qu'à l'heure actuelle, si tout le monde vivait comme les Américains, il faudrait 6 planètes, mais si tout le monde vivait comme les Burkinabés, un dixième de planète suffirait. Donc, pour que les Burkinabés puissent légitimement consommer une empreinte écologique soutenable, il faudrait qu'on consomme moins, puisque d'ores et déjà, on dépasse, en moyenne mondiale, on dépasse d'environ 30% la capacité de régénération de la biosphère. Donc c'est effectivement notre décroissance est une condition nécessaire pour qu'ils puissent résoudre leurs propres problèmes, pour leur donner un peu plus d'espace de vie.
O nos emancipamos todos o nadie se emancipa. Y quienes creen que están muy bien porque tienen la comida caliente, abundante, el agua en la casa y creen que ya lograron todo, eso es falso. Eso es muy temporal, eso es muy eventual. Mientras haya gente que no tenga agua para beber, su suerte, su estabilidad es frágil. La estabilidad para que cada persona en su país o en mi país pueda garantizar verdaderamente su bienestar et si otros también tienen bienestar.
Finalement, la décroissance, c'est essentiellement une réduction de l'empreinte écologique, réduction de la toxicodépendance, donc réduction du travail, redécouverte d'autres dimensions, réduction du gâchis, réduction des déchets, etc. Si on voulait être vraiment rigoureux, il faudrait parler d'accroissance, comme on parle d'athéisme, c'est-à-dire de ça qu'il s'agit, sortir de la religion, de la croissance, de l'économie, et repenser donc une organisation sociale Alors je dis souvent aussi, la croissance, c'est pas une alternative, c'est une matrice d'alternatives. C'est sortir de ce totalitarisme économique pour réouvrir la voie à une histoire plurielle, chaque groupe humain, chaque société devant définir au fond sa propre civilisation, sa propre culture, ses propres valeurs, les retrouver ou en réinventer d'autres.
I know that my daughter, who's 24, and her children are not going to have a stable, sustainable, and sane world unless every child born in Ethiopia and Indonesia and Bolivia also has that expectation. This is a very small community.